Today we will tell the epic story of Spartacus, the leader of the greatest slave rebellion in history. Get ready to hear the tale of the hero who made Rome kneel. The Roman Empire was one of the most impressive and most extensive empires in the world. However, this reign was built entirely on a system of slavery. Rome's victories, territorial gains, and prosperity rose on the shoulders of chained slaves. And one of these slaves launched the Great Slave Rebellion following Spartacus in the twilight of the Roman Empire. Before being enslaved, Spartacus was a Thracian soldier who had served in the Roman army. One day, he refused to obey the commanders who demanded that the Roman Empire attack its own people. He escaped, was captured, and enslaved. Then he was sold to a cruel man named Lentulus Batiatus, who made him a gladiator in Capua. When he joined the school, everyone who saw him understood he was different. In the training sessions, he fought skillfully and surpassed both the gladiators and the instructors. In a short time, he became a leader in the eyes of the other slaves, and he gained renown throughout Capua. This fame even reached Rome. Batiatus, who had become famous for the performances of his gladiators, one day received an invitation to a fighting event in Rome. He would send his best gladiators to Rome to fight before the people. For Spartacus and the others, this meant death. Because in the shows in Rome, defeated gladiators were not spared. For Spartacus, who constantly had the idea of escape in his mind, this was the last straw that broke the camel's back. Together with his friends Crixus, Ennomaus, Castus, and Gannicus, a near-term escape plan was prepared. Their goal was to break their chains before entering the Roman arena. On a summer night in 73 BC, the plan was put into action. The participation of 200 gladiators in this revolt was expected. However, the plan had been leaked and the guards had gone on alert. Still, about 70 gladiators remained faithful to the plan. They had only kitchen knives, sticks, and stones in their hands. The guards were neutralized one by one in a short time. The gladiators seized the weapons depot and armed themselves with the swords there, revealing the aim of Capua. The escape plan had succeeded and the revolt had begun. Spartacus and his friends took refuge in the mountains of Mount Vesuvius so they could not be easily found. Here, the place where Italy lived was a natural fortress surrounded by various olive groves and rocky terrain. At first they were only 70 people. But when the news of the revolt spread in and around Capua, slaves fleeing from their masters began to flock to the mountains. In a short time, the number of rebels reached thousands. The Roman administrators did not take the news from the gladiator school in Capua seriously at first. In the Senate, the reflection of the incident was merely a simple slave revolt. It would last 3 days, 5 at most. Therefore, the first person assigned was a nobleman without any war experience. Gaius Claudius Glaber was given an army of 3,000 men. However, this army did not consist of trained soldiers, but of newly raised ordinary troops. Some were even volunteers. Glaber's task was simple. He would surround Spartacus and his men who had fled to the top of Mount Vesuvius, condemn them to starvation, and force them to surrender. Mount Vesuvius was high and steep. Glaber had taken control of the only exit route. However, Spartacus and his men circled around the back of Glaber's camp and launched a surprise attack. Panic began among the Roman ranks. It was not understood what had happened to Glaber's army, which was unprepared for the attack. As swords shattered Roman armor, the shouts of the gladiators grew stronger and stronger. The destruction of Glaber's men was almost a humiliation for Rome. The situation had now gone beyond a revolt started by gladiators, turning into a direct challenge to the heart of Rome. After the news of the Vesuvius victory began to spread, slaves across Rome broke their chains and began to join Spartacus's ranks. Spartacus's army grew day by day. Their numbers first reached 5,000, then 10,000, then 30,000. But most of these people were ordinary slaves who had never held a sword and did not know how to fight. A military order was established with Spartacus's successful commander Crixus. Looting was forbidden and discipline was imposed on the slave army. The Roman Empire was now facing not a small revolt, but a popular movement that had spread across Italy. The Senate could not risk a second humiliation. A new army was formed under the command of its important consuls, Publius Varinius and Lucius Caesennius, and sent upon the rebels. When Spartacus heard this, he divided his army into small groups and scattered them toward the Roman units. Pausanias's army was included in the campaign and was completely destroyed in a nighttime raid. Then, by joining Varinius's forces together, they were frequently ambushed along a shortcut through the forest and destroyed. Now there was serious panic in the Senate. Rome's rural areas were burning, roads were being closed, and trade was disrupted. Spartacus and his army seized many cities such as Beneventum, Nola, Nicaea, Metapontum, and Thurii. The slaves of these large cities also joined him, and their numbers reached up to 80,000 within a year. This was almost 1/4 of the Romans. Despite having this power, Spartacus never intended to capture Rome. His goal was to cross the Alps, return to his lands in Thrace, and live freely there. However, in the end, not everyone agreed with him. Some still sought plunder, and others wanted revenge on Rome. One of those who experienced this conflict was the Gallic warrior Crixus, Spartacus's companion. Crixus wanted to enter the heart of the empire, take the city, and bring Rome to its knees. The discussions dragged on. No consensus was reached. In the end, the army split. Spartacus headed north with the main force of about 50,000 men, while Crixus remained in the south with 30,000 warriors. These divisions were an opportunity the Roman Senate could not miss. They immediately took action without wasting time. A 40,000-man Roman army made up of experienced and successful soldiers began advancing south under the command of the famous commander Lucius Gellius. The two sides met on opposite sides of Mount Garganus. Crixus and his men were quite exhausted because they had walked a long distance. Despite this, the first attack was launched by the slave army, but they were repelled as if they had hit a wall in their charge. Crixus's men began to slowly melt away against the Roman professionals. With the death of Crixus, the slave army, now leaderless, was completely annihilated. After the victory, Gellius and his army moved north and advanced toward Spartacus. Meanwhile, another Roman army under the command of Clodianus also moved north to prevent Spartacus from reaching the Alps. Rome's aim was to trap the rebels between the two armies and completely destroy them. But Spartacus trapped Clodianus's army in a valley in the Apennine Mountains at Pistoria. After the fierce battle, the Roman army was largely annihilated. The surviving soldiers and Clodianus had to flee. After this victory, Spartacus reached Gellius's forces and confronted them widely at Umbria. The battle between the two sides was won by Spartacus and his army, and Gellius, like Clodianus, fled the battlefield. The two defeated generals gathered their remaining few soldiers and marched upon Spartacus once more. However, the Romans were defeated by Spartacus again in the battle fought at Picenum. Now, the Senate, having lost its patience, dismissed both generals. In the eyes of the Senate, there was only one man who could end this shame: Marcus Licinius Crassus. The richest man in Rome, a political force, and a general known for his ruthlessness throughout history. A new 50,000-man army was immediately formed and placed under the command of Marcus Crassus. Crassus, moving northward, positioned his army to the south of the Alps. Spartacus tried to break through Crassus's forces but failed. Having lost 6,000 of his men here, he began retreating south. His exhausted forces were now extremely tired. For this reason, Spartacus decided to go to the island of Sicily. The island of Sicily was the granary of Rome and had seen many slave revolts before. If he could reach it, he could start a new revolt there. Perhaps he could drag Rome into a civil war that would last a lifetime. For this purpose, he made an agreement with pirates to ferry them across. He set up camp at Rhegium in Calabria and waited for the pirates there. But the pirates took the gold they had been given and fled, abandoning Spartacus halfway. Realizing this too late, Spartacus was trapped in a narrow area in southern Italy. Meanwhile, Crassus built an extraordinary defensive line to encircle Spartacus. At the tip of the Italian peninsula, a 60-kilometer-long defensive line was constructed. This line was reinforced with trenches and walls. Additionally, the Roman navy surrounded the rebels from the sea. Spartacus and his army were now isolated both by land and sea. Day by day, hunger increased, and the morale of the army began to break. Spartacus and his army broke through the defensive line in a nighttime raid. As they fled north, Crassus pursued them. Meanwhile, the famous Roman general Pompeius and the Macedonian consul Lucullus were also joining Crassus with their armies. Spartacus turned toward Brundisium and planned to cross to the opposite shore from there. But when they arrived in Brundisium, they saw that Lucullus had landed. Their plans had failed. Spartacus tried one last time to negotiate, sending a letter to Crassus, but Crassus rejected it. Upon this, Spartacus and his army began marching north again. However, this time their path was cut off by Pompeius and his army. The year was 71 BC near the Silarus River. Spartacus and Crassus were once again face to face. The slave force numbered about 50,000. Their morale had weakened and their resources were exhausted, but they were still free. When Spartacus stood before his men, he gave them one last speech. Today here, we will either walk out like those born free, or we will die like free warriors. Rome made us slaves, but we will determine our own fate. After this speech, Spartacus and his men charged against the Roman army. The clash was extremely terrifying. In the assault of the slaves, it was as if they met a full and equal resistance. As the losses increased, Spartacus drew his sword and ran toward Crassus's command tent. 2 high-ranking commanders were killed, but Crassus could not be reached. The area where the guards were hiding was surrounded by Roman soldiers. He fought heroically, but could not make it out alive. With his death, the slave army quickly dispersed. In this clash, approximately 50,000 slaves lost their lives, while the Roman army suffered 12,000 casualties. General Crassus had the bodies of 6,000 rebels crucified along the road leading to Rome as a lesson. Rome had once again emerged victorious. However, unforgettable traces remained after the revolt Spartacus had started. In general, the fact that Spartacus's body could not be found despite being searched for months made him even more legendary. According to some, he had managed to survive the battle and disappeared without a trace. Although Rome tried to erase his name, Spartacus's name was written in golden letters in history as a hero of freedom. Spartacus may have been defeated on the battlefield, but his struggle for freedom has never been forgotten. If you want to be inspired by history, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications.